There are so many people who say, well, it's a fascinating topic, but it's not for me to get involved in. And I continuously say the same thing back, which is you are either on the side of the oppressed or you're on the side of the oppressors. There's no middle ground in this. You either contribute towards disabled people's oppression, or you actually contribute towards trying to ensure disabled people's emancipation.
Hello and welcome to this Human Rights Deep Dive podcast. My guest for this conversation is Miro Griffiths. Miro is a human rights activist of some distinction in the United Kingdom. He is a PhD lecturer in sociology at the John Moores University in Liverpool. Between 2007 and 2013, Miro was an advisor to the government of the United Kingdom, and in 2014, at the age of just 25, Miro Griffiths was recognised for his campaigning work on behalf of disabled people with an MBE in the Queen's Birthday Honours List. In the first of a two-part conversation recorded through Skype, I discussed with Miro the progress of disability rights activism, the model of ableism, the links and disconnects with other human rights movements, and the politics of health and vulnerability. Miro began our conversation by giving his view of the current conditions for disability rights activism in the United Kingdom.
So I think there's an overwhelming concern regarding the impact of austerity measures. We've seen drastic cuts being made to the social security system in the UK, and this has had an increase in medical assessments, in sanctions towards disabled people relying on support, and a number of horrific incidents of correlations where people have been taking their life in relation to how they've been treated by the system. So I think the impact of austerity is one area, and the general welfare system is part of that. I also think we're seeing how the advancements in our rights, whether that be legislation or policy on the ground, is continuously being reversed in numerous different ways. So the education system is one key area where there was a desire to move towards an inclusive education system practice. But as we've seen with the coalition government and beyond that, a desire to remove this bias towards inclusion, which is a phrase that was used by the government. And it's led to more segregated initiatives in the areas of education. Also, in terms of employment as well, we've seen deep concerns about disabled people not accessing the labour market. Those who can work and who want to work are not being provided with the right level of support, or it's conditional on the basis of their work that they're doing. So, for example, certain welfare systems are capping people's support needs, irrespective of what their needs are and the basis of what they're trying to achieve in the workplace. So generally, there is this picture of undermining people's rights, undermining the value that they are as citizens in the UK. And I think this is also reflected in the recent observations by the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which found that, to quote the committee lead, found that there was a human catastrophe on the basis of the decisions being taken by the UK government. And I think what's most worrying for many of the activists involved in disability rights is that the government and those with considerable amounts of power has decided to reject the findings of the UN, dismiss it out of hand, and it's led to more concern about which way we're going in terms of disabled people's life chances, because we're seeing an increase in segregation and institutionalisation across the UK.
Miro, you're active in disability rights at the European level. Are the concerns that you raise about what is going on in the United Kingdom mirrored in Europe across the continent?
I would say so. I think speaking to the researchers and activists and friends and colleagues across Europe, you're seeing this general picture of disabled people having reduced life chances. Across Europe, there is a key concern around the deinstitutionalisation agenda. So the idea of closing down institutions, closing down services that seek to create more marginalisation for disabled people in various different ways, whether that be group homes or community homes or day centres and so forth. And I think the reality of having a decent social security system which provides the right level of support for disabled people is very far off in terms of it being realised. And I think the UN CRPD, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which has been signed and ratified by many countries across Europe, including the European Union, hasn't necessarily had its articles realised, and I think the reflection of how many activists are continuously trying to demand changes against what I would refer to as the ultranationalism that is taking hold of Europe in key parts of across the continent is of more concern, because the question is that if our rights are not being realised now, and then we continue down this route of a segregated Europe because of the concerns around Brexit for the UK and how that will impact on the rest of Europe or the European Union, and also in terms of the agendas by national government to provide the realisation of independent living. I mean independent living referenced by the Disabled People's Movement, and indeed issues around deinstitutionalisation, inclusive employment and so forth. All these issues are getting even further out of reach, I feel, for disabled people and the social movements. And whilst we're in a state of flux with regards to humanity, with citizenship, with trying to support people from all different backgrounds, I think now is a time that we can really try to consolidate our arguments and provide a vision and try to get towards that solidarity that is deeply required if we're going to ensure that disabled people have the right level of support and be valued citizens in their countries.
How then do you account for the seemingly growing interest and willingness to accept the importance of treating and helping those people who have mental difficulties in the United Kingdom? It's a story which is appearing more and more in the popular newspapers. There's more and more media interest in this subject. How do you account for that?
So I suppose it is getting more activity around media and state response and the local authorities and so forth. I think it's a question. Sometimes it's a question of tokenism, I feel. So one day you'll have a large campaign realised on the TV or on the news, or the government will give a soundbite in regards to providing more funding into mental health and so forth. But I don't necessarily think it gets down to the causes as to the marginalisation that people with mental health conditions experience on a daily basis. And I think it has a lot of commonality with the wider issues associated with the disabled population, which is that our needs are and the fact that we don't have our needs met, and the fact that we don't have the right support, irrespective of our mental health condition or physical impairment and so forth, is one of a political issue, and it's how we try to frame that. I think a lot of the debate and narrative around mental health is not necessarily framed in the mainstream areas. It's not necessarily framed on this basis. It's usually done with one that is focused on the medicalization of mental health, how you treat it through health professionals and so forth. And I don't necessarily think that we've got to a position of reflecting as to why there is this prevalence of mental health. And actually, I would argue that it's to do with the way that we've collectively organized our society, politically, economically, and culturally, and so forth. So I think that there's a need to try and shift this debate into one which is more around social injustice as to why people don't access the support when they want that support, why there is an amount of stigma associated with the set cohorts that we're talking about. And I think that's why it's important to try to either highlight or retain some of that important messages from the activists associated with mental health issues. Indeed, so you've got the examples of mental health survivor networks that try to reject the intrusion of psychiatry and the domination of psychiatry, and actually talk about mental health from the point of view of trying to be valued as an individual in their community and so forth. So I think, yes, to take your point, I think, yes, it is being raised, which hopefully is a good thing in one sense at a kind of surface level. But I don't necessarily think it goes deep enough and doesn't necessarily contextualize it within the political debate surrounding wider marginalisation issues.
In order to set up the later conversation that we're going to have, I want you to outline from your point of view, what are the politics of disability as you see them?
So I think the politics of disability would be, firstly, trying to remove it away from medicalisation. So historically, we've seen disability as a consequence of somebody's health condition, or the way that their mind processes information, or the way that we think and so forth. And actually this reinforces that notion of normality, i.e. that there is a certain way that you do things, and if you don't do them in this way, then you must be seen as different, abnormal, and therefore you may be perceived as inferior and so forth. So I think the first point of the politics of disability is to try to separate that distinction between somebody's condition, somebody's biology, and their experience of marginalization. So to give you an example of that, as somebody with a physical impairment who uses a wheelchair, my experience of marginalization in terms of poor access to the built environment, or indeed people's attitudes, or indeed the policies that I interact with in order to have my needs met, they're not manifesting on the basis of my health condition. They're manifesting on the way that we've collectively organized society. So I think it's about trying to place disability within this wider context of collective responsibility, solidarity. How do we create a society? Who do we create a society for? And it's those questions which really create the basis of disability occurring, because disability obviously fluctuates. It's related to social class, for example, as well. It's related to issues around where in one environment my experience of disability may be very less evident than if I'm in an environment where my needs aren't going to be met. So I think it's about trying to politicize it in the sense of saying there are actions being taken, there are policies being implemented by people with considerable power, and that is causing disability to occur. It's not being caused by the individual's health condition.
In terms of society's approach, what would you like to see happen? What does society need to do to include people with disabilities more?
So I think the first point is around this issue of defending solidarity that I spoke about. I get asked this question quite a bit, and it reminds me of that argument whereby people say, well, I'm not disabled, but what do you want me to do to try and help out? And it's like it goes back to this idea that I see talked about a lot, which I can't remember the phrase correctly, but it's something like, if you don't have any kids, but you'll happily pay into a system to ensure that other people's kids can go to school and so forth, and the education system is secure. And it's part of that element of recognizing that actually, you may have no connection to disability at this moment in time, but there are people out there who are being marginalized by the system. And it's whether you're a part of that dialogue to want to create change. So, we have protests and we have social movements and we need allies continuously. But I think the very first question is when are we going to say, actually this situation is not good enough, or this experience that is going on for people is not good enough? Because again, it's this. I was at a talk yesterday, and somebody said about how we have institutions, we have people not receiving the right level of support, and yet there is so much, in inverted commas, violence that takes place to ensure that things carry on the way that they're working. And I think it's about that as well. It's about recognizing how we are doing things and questioning whether the contribution that we're making to society, does it perpetuate this experience of oppression and marginalization for people? So I think the first point is to ask people, just question your actions, question your apathy towards news that you hear or the information that you receive about disabled people, about the lives of disabled people. And what is your response to that? Is it to kind of reinforce that tragedy model of disability where we think, oh, this must be terrible for people and they must be suffering? Or is it more around trying to actually make a stand, make a contribution to the demands that the disabled people's movement is making in these environments? Because I think if we don't have allies and we don't have a solidified basis of trying to create change, then we'll never be able to push back against the current levels of power. So I think the first point is questioning it. I think the next point is saying, will you participate in trying to highlight this issue of the politicization of disability? Will you continuously emphasize disability as a medical issue, which is unhelpful, which leads to further segregation and the focus on rehabilitation and cure and so forth? Or will you be part of the demands and the debate which surrounds people accessing the right level of support, which questions why the welfare system doesn't work as it is, which questions why there are separate education systems, one for disabled people and one for people who are deemed non-disabled? Again, all of this is creating a culture and creating a society which says one group is deserving and one group is undeserving. So I suppose the question is what are you doing to contribute towards that? And which side are you on? Because there are so many people who say, well, it's a fascinating topic, but it's not for me to get involved in. And I continuously say the same thing back, which is you are either on the side of the oppressed or you're on the side of the oppressors. There is no middle ground in this. You either contribute towards disabled people's oppression, or you actually contribute towards trying to ensure disabled people's emancipation. And I think, irrespective of where you are, whether you work in policy development, whether you work as parliamentarians, whether you work as service deliverers, whether you just work as general functioning of society, your daily interactions are either perpetuating that or trying to tackle it. And I suppose it's around reflecting on the basis of how you think about disability and then what you're going to do about it.
Now, you're a university teacher, you teach sociology, and you know better than I do that there have been many rights-based movements since the end of the Second World War. Let's take a few of them. The movement around black civil rights, the women's movement, the LGBT movement, animal rights, to name just a few. When you look at the evolution of disability rights politics, do you see any similarities, or do you see disability rights operating in a different space?
It's a very interesting question. I think the first point to reference is that the kind of trajectory of the disabled people's movement and the activists who belong to that did and were inspired and continue to be inspired by other groups who are trying to fight social injustices. So you can see similarities, and you can see how there was collaboration between different groups. So, for example, in America, there was collaboration between civil rights activists, people of color, with disabled people as well in that kind of discussion and that kind of debate. I suppose where we are going forward, there is this issue around what I would refer to as a notion of what it means to be a human being, because I think irrespective of where you are in terms of your experiences of power and how that may manifest into different ways and how that may affect you, it's your first question around what does disability mean and that kind of where are we going with it. Well, I think there is no universal construct in disability. A lot of it is medicalized and heavily rooted in that kind of discourse. So if you just think that by grouping these marginalized groups together and trying to work together, there'll be similarities. Well, the problem is that if other groups who are trying to fight social injustices don't have the same political narrative associated with disability, then there could be a way of undermining the work of disabled activists. So I think it's about collaborating, and there is indeed, of course, a need for solidarity and that element of not trying to undermine each other's protests and activities and agendas and so forth. But I think the way to bring us all together in this debate is to try to think about what it means to be a human being in the 21st century. And there are some fascinating pieces of work around that, around this idea of humanism in the 21st century. And what is quite interesting for those of you who are interested, I suppose, would be to look at some of the work of the Dishuman Manifesto, which has come out from researchers in Manchester, Sheffield, and elsewhere in the UK. But it looks at what does it mean to be a disabled person in the 21st century, and it's this idea that actually for a lot of disabled people, they don't feel like human beings, and actually this characteristic and the way that it has been interpreted and kind of dealt with by those with power has contributed to this feeling of dehumanization. And I suppose that is a commonality for a lot of other groups who throughout their time and experiences of segregation, marginalization, stigma and oppression has this element of what does it mean to be a valued human being alongside the so-called normality that exists within society. I think that's where we can be brought together to try and work together in order to have that, have the opportunity to find common goals. The common goal is to what does it mean to build a society which values everybody, not on the basis of so-called prescribed structuralist agendas. But what I would say, which I think is quite interesting to note, is that in the UK we used to have the Disability Rights Commission with funding to tackle issues of disability and marginalisation and disability inequality. But what you found was that when the United Kingdom Equality and Human Rights Commission came together to bring the different protector strands together to work on different agendas, people were worried about how that may manifest, because you'll have all these protected characteristics using the same resources to try to build towards an inclusive society. And again, the EHRC gets heavily criticised, but if you look at its funding has been depleted and dropped throughout the years by the state government. So I think there's something around how, by bringing ourselves together, we shouldn't necessarily just become a squashed entity, which then gets further marginalized and further squeezed out by those with concentrated power. So I think there's an issue around trying to find commonality, but also recognizing our individual identities, which allow us then for new members to come through and explore before they get to that level of exploring the intersectional aspects of these different characteristics.
On that point then, Miro, given the political importance attached to identity politics, and we've named a few of them, what is the pathway for disability rights activists to achieve the kind of political breakthrough, the kind of visibility that's needed to push the kinds of concerns that you have further to the political forefront?
Well, I suppose, firstly we need to have more disabled people who are looking at disability from a politicized construct involved in these discussions and debates. And again, I think the opportunities for disabled people to be part of these conversations is heavily reduced because of failure to provide support and so forth. An example of this, a great example of this is if you look at the kind of studying around social movements and protests and so forth, and we talk about the significance and importance of having groups come together to rally against injustice and so forth. But actually, I can hold a talk on disability, and maybe 3 people will get there, and then people say, oh, well, this is not a very interesting topic. But actually, the majority of people who want to be engaged in these conversations are locked away, or can't get out of their homes, or don't have the right level of support to participate in these current environments. So I think the first question is, how do we ensure that we have disabled people from various different backgrounds with different ideas around the politicization of disability? What does it mean if you're disabled and you're gay? What does it mean if you're disabled and black, and so forth? Having those opportunities to promote these messages at various different levels, at a local level, at a national level, involved in political parties as well as groups that are outside the political spectrum of political groups. So I suppose that's the first point. But I think there's also something around, it's to do with the way that young people are given opportunities to be part of these debates. Because I think if you look at how we treat young people in society, and my research at a PhD level is on young disabled people and their interest in activism. But what I think is quite fascinating is that how our whole context of young people is framed around individualism. So we talk to young people about, what do you want to do when you're older? What do you want to be? Or how do you want to act and perform in the future and so forth? What we tend not to do in terms of our interactions with each other, or indeed in terms of our kind of structures like the education system and so forth, is to ask young people and to support young people to build the future society, to reflect on what that society looks like. And this is very much the case for young disabled people as well, because if we don't allow these opportunities for young people to take control of these discussions around a model society, take these discussions around what does it mean to have rights, what does it mean to be a citizen, then all that's going to happen is the domination of economic events, corporate agendas, consumerist ideals. These will colonize what we think about when we say the future. So I think for disability, as indeed for any other marginalized group as well, it's allowing and ensuring and facilitating that dialogue for young people from these different backgrounds to have opportunities to be asked and explore what does the future mean for them, but the future for society rather than just the future for the individual. And I think that's how we then build towards having a socially just, equal society. Because if we think about the kind of quantitative figures around politics, and again, as a sociologist, I kind of don't necessarily trust statistics that well. I like to look at more in-depth conversations and interviews and dialogue and so forth. But if you look at it, a lot of young people, particularly in the UK, for example, are associated with the left. They're associated with exploring left ideals of housing, employment, community development, and so forth. So disabled people need to be part of that, but that starts with trying to explore what the future means for everybody at a very young age. And I don't think we do that enough at the moment.
In your answer, Miro, you talked about individualism. That got me thinking about how much the notion of personal agency has been a very important theme in democratic politics, and how much this has affected parties of the centre-left across Europe. Mm-hmm. On that basis, then, how has all of the baggage, for better or for worse, attached to the understanding of individualism, of personal agency, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, how has this affected the disability rights movement over the last 30 or 40 years?
I think this is the crux of the matter, because I think we have different ways of defining neoliberalism and capitalism and so forth, and I think some of it gets used in a very lazy way. what I would say is that our current kind of cascade of events has led us to this point. And what you're saying, I think, touches on how the perception of people has shifted to I suppose, adopt the principles of personal responsibility. Because if you look at the expansion of consumer choice, if you look at the infiltration of the market within public services, dismantling of existing support systems and so forth, it's produced a narrative that people have the so-called freedom and choice to do things. But actually, I think this is it's a false realization, because I suppose what we need to get back to is looking at the relationship between different characters, looking at the relationship between the state and the citizen, looking at the relationship between the public services and the markets and so forth, consumption and provision, because all that this does is it renders people to try to preserve the economic productivity of their actions and their ideas. So, now I feel dismayed when I hear conversations where we talk about disability rights or social justice in a wider sense possible. And people say, yeah, well, how's that going to save money? Or they'll say, yeah, but how's that going to generate wealth for society and so forth? Because continuously now, rights and the notion of rights has almost become a commodity. It's almost become part of that element of trying to justify it on the basis of economic productivity, on the basis of individual responsibility and so forth. So I think we're really getting to the point where the desire to be a human being and the ideas that we have and the aspirations that we have and for ourselves and for society has to abide by the economic conditions and prescriptions laid out by current member states and by current corporate agendas. And this undermines heavily the demands of various different groups. And in the case of disability, it certainly does so. Because again, I'm one of these people who I don't necessarily think that capitalism caused disability, but it certainly acted as a catalyst for disability, and it's created disability to appear and manifest into a specific way. So I think if we're looking at rights and we're looking at this issue of solidarity and collective responsibility for how we create this marginalization, we're never going to win this argument on the basis of economic productivity, because there's always going to be a question of, well, you do cost, or, well, society isn't adapted for you, and to adapt it will cost this. It will require changes. It will require resources, and so forth. So I rather take us away from this individualism and say that the focus should be more on what does it mean for us to interact now? What's going to be the outcome of that? What does it mean to have an education system which isn't built on industrial revolution ideals of being ready for the workforce, but it's actually about exploring and challenging and critiquing all these different concepts that we have floating around in society? This is where the change is required, because if we continue down this route of personal individualism, issues around economic productivity and so forth, then as we've seen in the UK and across Europe and across the world, disabled people will be left out of this discussion. They'll be further marginalized in this process, and that any attempt to end segregation, any attempt to dismantle the segregated initiatives and build an inclusive society will just continuously be underwhelmed.
What then is the relationship between disability rights activists, Miro, and those who wield power? I have in my mind the models of other human rights organizations, particularly black civil rights movements or black human rights movements, the women's movement, LGBT movement. I can imagine at the beginning there is a sense we trust in the goodwill of those who have power to see the righteousness of our cause and to adapt government policies in that direction. Then there may well be a rupture based on a exasperation with the slowness of delivery or the unwillingness of those who have power to go the whole way. And it's that break that perhaps brings a new realization, brings new people to the fore. There's a growing militancy on the side of the rights activists. We see this model certainly in the black civil rights movements and perhaps in the women's and gay movements. I just wonder if you've had a similar evolution in the disability rights movement as well.
To take from that, I would say that there is this constant necessity to try to critique and challenge the current ableist perspectives of humanity, which is being espoused by those with considerable power within society, be that from from economics, from politics, from culture, and so forth. One thing I would recognize in this kind of conversation, something that sparked when you were talking just then, is this idea of civil disobedience, the idea of rejecting, the idea of pushing back against this. And again, it's this idea that what is disobedient. It's only disobedient in the eyes of those with the resources and the power to say this has to stop or this has to change. And I suppose what we've seen is disabled people realizing that actually the current trajectory for disability rights is going in the direction of further ableism. It's going in the direction of furthering the agendas of those that seek to push aside disability rights, to try to appease it with very small tokenistic gestures. And what I would reference is that many of the disabled activists now are recognizing that there is a cascade of events which comprises where we are in society, which is not, so we can't just say, bring down those with power now and everything will be fine. It doesn't work like that. I think it's about trying to recognize and critique what are the steps that have been taken to result as to where we are now, and then question what needs to change going forward. And I suppose part of that is a critique of the current ways of working and the current ways of how we collectively organize ourselves. But disabled people have to be part of that. It can't be taken for granted that disabled people and their organizations will be part of that. Because as we've seen throughout history, those who have tried to fight social injustice have not necessarily done so on the basis of trying to include or protect disabled people in a sense of seeing disability as a political issue. And many people on the left, I feel, fail to account for including disabled people as part of that. They almost take it as a kind of an assumption that there will be a presence of disabled people in these discussions and so forth. And again, you can look at how history has developed. And I was teaching a class yesterday, and we talked about the ideas of social security, the ideas of a welfare state to protect groups who are marginalized in society. And people in the UK quote the likes of Beveridge, who was one of the key leaders in the welfare system. And yet, if you look at what he said around disability, it was horrific. The idea of sterilization, the idea of taking the citizenship away from disabled people. So there is this issue of ensuring that disabled people are part of that overall critique and question of what the left are trying to create as a vision for change, where they're trying to destabilize current aspects of power. But again, if we think about the way that we have established society, everything that we do is affecting each other. It's having a consequence for other groups and so forth. It's having a consequence for other people in our vicinity, in our environment. So where we need to get to, in my view, is recognizing that if we do want to create change, if we do recognize that the events that have comprised where we've got to now is underwhelming and creates further marginalization, then we must be conscious of how we are affecting each other in this dialogue and how we are affecting each other in this debate. Because I know I'm going a little bit off a tangent, but I think it's quite worthwhile, referencing that as somebody who is on the left, and typically, as we've seen with the kind of emergence of ultranationalism and alt-right and so forth, and the dominant ideals of the way that society is organized at the moment, the left is being pushed out and squeezed out continuously. But the left have to have a vision for how society is going to be organized. It has to have a vision for what it means to be a human being in the 21st century. It has to have a vision for what it means to be a valued, productive member of society, and question what that means in terms of various different people trying to access different environments. So we have to create a vision, and if we are going to create a vision, then we have to ensure disabled people are part of that conversation, part of that dialogue. But those who are involved in the dialogue need to ensure that it is paramount that we recognize disability as a political construct, because we are dangerously close to just reinforcing continuously this narrative that disability is a medical issue, and therefore the response to tackle disability is one of cure, rehabilitation, segregation. And we've seen this throughout history. It continues now. I was speaking to an activist yesterday in Liverpool, and he said that everything that we've tried to achieve over 40 years has just been pushed back continuously, and we are dangerously close to reversing everything that we've achieved in the matter of less than 10 years. It's dangerously true, but what we do need to do is ensure that we are part of this critique of society in the future. And at the moment, our voice is not being heard. So it's about other groups who are also trying to fight injustice, make allegiances, align with disabled people and their organizations to tackle that widest issue possible, which is how do we want to exist in the 21st century.
You talked about ableism. On a wider point, the Council of Europe has published its Disability Action Plan. How does the Council of Europe stop itself from falling into the trap of ableism when ableism is so much the currency of conversation between those who have power and disability rights activists?
So I suppose the way to ensure it doesn't do that is to see whether there is a line of reasoning throughout the whole of the action plan, which says, does this challenge the idea of normality? Does it challenge the idea that there is a certain way to behave and to act in society? And if you don't do that, then you are on the peripherals and therefore subjected to marginalization, oppression, and so forth. Because when I see various different action plans, be it from the Council of Europe, be it from the Disability Intergroup, be it from groups in manifestos in different countries and so forth, I don't necessarily get the sense that we are taking a wider approach to looking at disability. A lot of our work on disability is crisis-driven. It's trying to respond to the crisis agendas that are manifesting in different ways. It doesn't necessarily question the root cause or the root ideology as to why this is happening in the first place. So, for example, you can have the deinstitutionalisation agenda, and you can have the opportunity to try to ensure structural funds aren't used for creating further institutionalised practice. But it doesn't question the basis as to why we think it's acceptable as a fellow citizen in that country, as somebody of the world, of somebody in the parliament of that country. Why did we even think it was possible or allowed to create an institutionalised agenda? Why do we allow a segregated education system to emerge? So I think a lot of our tactics and a lot of our action plan and agendas don't highlight that, don't get that question raised enough to the people, to the policymakers, to the decision makers, to the commissioners, and so forth. We don't ask that question enough, because what we do is we say, well, there is this situation, and we want to aspire to this, but we don't question why we're continuing with the current practice as it is. Because again, this issue of ableism, if we don't necessarily highlight it and draw attention to it, then it trickles throughout the surface. It trickles along, riding along at the side of our actions and our messages and so forth, as taken for granted. Because a great way of explaining this is in the work of, I think it was two researchers, Swain and French, in the UK, disability scholars, and they talked about the idea that actually, if you take a superficial example like a wheelchair user, if you're a wheelchair user and you say, this environment is inaccessible for me, I want ramps, I want adapted technology and so forth, many people will say, yeah, I'm right behind you on that. Yeah, brother or sister, we want to fight for that change. If I say to you, yeah, I'm a wheelchair user and I'm absolutely proud of my identity as somebody who has limitations of the body in terms of normality, or is absolutely fine with the idea of being a wheelchair user, is absolutely fine with the idea of the way that my body works at the moment. This doesn't necessarily get embraced in the same way as a former example, because it questions that notion of ableism. It questions that assumption that, well, because you can't walk, or because your mind works in this way, or you process information in this way, therefore you wouldn't want that. You'd want to be like us. So it's that message of normality that is riding through. I think the action agendas, from the action plans, from the strategies, from the messages coming out from the parliamentarians, it's got to be a direct question to groups, to individuals, saying, why are we accepting this approach? Why do we constantly ask for it? Why do we constantly reproduce it through our actions in terms of institutionalization, in terms of sheltered employment initiatives, and so forth? we don't get to the line of thought or the line of reason throughout all our agendas, which is we need to change what it means to be normal. And I think that is missing from our work. It doesn't get referenced enough. People think of it in such abstract ways, but it's so fundamental to the way that we organize collectively and the way that we aspire to actually create a functioning society. We've got to question this, because all we're doing then is saying there is this group that are marginalized. This is a society that they want to be part of, so we need to make a bridge to that. That's not what disabled activists are asking at all. Disabled activists, in the majority of those who I speak to and research with, we are asking for a rebooting of society. We're asking for a rebuilding of the way that we think about certain aspects of society. We're thinking of the way that we structure society and so forth. So we do need to get to a point of ensuring that our agendas and our actions, and those that are mirrored and kind of developed by the Council of Europe and so forth, are asking that question, which is not trying to fix symptoms on the ground, but is to say, okay, we live in a social world. What does that social world want to look like? What does it want to look like for different groups? And then how do we build towards that model idea? And I don't see that in the action plans currently.
Allow me then to take you back to the conversation around the different or the other human rights organisations. Have you seen in the evolution of disability rights activism in the UK, Miro, common cause been made with these groups, that these groups have made overtures towards disability rights activists and vice versa, so that there is a common front? Because one of the features, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the features of ableism has also been to say that all human rights movements could be grouped together. So we've seen a willingness to put issues to do with ethnicity in the same pot as issues to do with gender, as issues to do with sexual orientation. So given that that is the mindset of those that wield power, have you seen then a willingness on the side of the human rights defenders to come together and to present a common front?
Well, on the kind of latter point that you made around those with power saying, we need to group these groups together. I, as a pessimist, I would probably think that's done deliberately to ensure that then resources are consolidated to that group and then can be justified to squeeze the resources and so forth. I think, to take your question, I think we do see commonality. We do see opportunities to work together. And we've seen that in terms of LGBTQ groups working with disabled people on the issues of, say, hate crime. We've seen opportunities where trade unions have worked with disabled people on the issues of employment and so forth. So there is groups working together from all these different protected and marginalized characteristics. But I suppose it goes back to that fundamental question, which is, do the groups that are not necessarily directly working on disability issues understand the politicization of disability? Or are they using that traditional ideas around what does disability mean?
What's your sense on that?
Well, my sense on that is that I don't think there has been enough demonstration by groups of inverted commas allies to the disabled people movement to demonstrate the significance of the politicization of disability. I think so often or not we kind of see the language around, for example, vulnerability emerging from these groups. Just to take this issue of vulnerability, I think it's quite key to the discussion that we're having in general in society. We've seen austerity cuts, we've seen the prevalence of hate crime and so forth, and the response is to say disabled people are vulnerable, they need protection, they need help and so forth. But yet, if you look at the demand and the agendas of the disabled people's movement across the world, from the very origins of it as well, and how that's kind of developed and kind of transgressed and so forth, you see how disabled activists and campaigners fought against the idea of vulnerability, because it's heavily linked to the idea of segregation, of protectionism, of taking choice and control away from disabled people. So sometimes, I as a socialist, I go to my local trade union groups and want to work with them, and they'll say, the cuts to support is devastating for disabled people, and I'll say, yeah, absolutely. And they'll say, yeah, because we're talking about a vulnerable group, and that actually the idea of vulnerability in this context is just being equated very lazily to disabled people. And I think it's about recognizing that we are all vulnerable, but it's contextualized. It depends on where we are. It depends on what we can access. It depends on our resources and the infrastructure around us. And it's very much the same for disability. But I think not enough has been done to try to raise awareness of the politicization of disability for other groups who are interested in trying to fight social injustice. And if we don't tackle that issue enough, then we'll just get this so-called lazy connection between disability and medicine, and disability and vulnerability, and disability and segregation and protectionism and so forth. So I think there is opportunity. There has been common grounds. We're seeing more of it now emerging because of the impact of austerity and the impact of our current kind of economic events around life chances and so forth. And now is a perfect opportunity for protest groups to come together, to work together, to try to offer this vision for change, suggest why it's required, what it can look like, and then sell the offer to the majority in order to gain even more support. Because I suppose the question for all our different groups, whether we're interested in issues associated with ethnic minorities and people of color, whether it's linked to gender issues, whether it's linked to LGBTQ issues or disability issues, and so forth. The question is are we galvanizing each other? Are we galvanizing our social movements, our protest groups, our ideas for change and so forth? Or do we accidentally depress and undermine each other and actually work to almost discourage each other from trying to put our messages forward? Because I think sometimes that does occur. And so I would be saying, well, if we don't find that commonality between us, if we don't work together, if we don't look at these issues from a political construct, because of course, the sociologists, I would be quoting C.W. Mills and the likes of Jenny Morris and so forth, who say, the personal is political. And we must see that as well for disabled people as well. If you're a disabled person and you can't have choice and control of your life, that's not a personal reflection of your biography. It's a political issue that needs to be addressed. And I think that if we don't work together and galvanize each other and support each other in our agendas, then this complete absence of pressure or this fragmentation and kind of disintegration of our work will just embolden many aspects of right-wing extremism, right-wing ideology and so forth, and the elements of the right who will just see the opportunity to pursue and act on ever more extreme agendas.
80 million people in Europe are said to have some form of disability. We know that the population of Europe is aging. Do you think that these two factors, plus others, the rise of identity politics, a more favourable, more inclusive approach towards all parts of society, are creating conditions whereby there will be an opportunity for disability rights activists such as yourself, Miro, and others to make the case for a more inclusive approach? Do you see that there is going to be this perfect storm of critical factors that could create an opening that we've not seen before?
No. Because the reason why I say no is because I think... before you give me an answer, can I just... what I'm really getting at is, are the politics around health and healthcare and the ageing society, is that something that disability rights activists can insert your understanding of disability politics in order to create a more favourable approach to the inclusive society that you want? That's what I'm getting at. Sure. And I think my response to that would be, we have to remember the recorded differences by researchers and activists who have kind of collected data on this and so forth, of the different demands associated with the disabled people's movement and what people like Bill Hughes, researcher, academic, would refer to as a health movement. Because the demands are slightly different. Because, again, the issue of disability shouldn't necessarily just be equated to older age or an aging population. And I think a perfect example, and this is why it's really important what you raised, is that in the UK, we have a discussion around social care, around the delivery of social care, the availability of it, and so forth. And so often, it is framed around older people. Now, I'm not discounting the needs of older people whatsoever, but actually, for a lot of disabled people of working age, of younger age as well, particularly of interest, is that they also rely on these services as well and access these services. And yet, the issues affecting their demographic is never taken into account. So I think we have to be very careful as to how this debate manifests and moves forward, because it is creating a perfect storm. as you've kind of referenced in our conversations. But I don't necessarily know if it will be a kind of moment of hope for disabled people, because we can see very easily how the dominant discourse around residential homes, segregation, nursing homes, collective communities for groups of a certain characteristic living together and so forth, how these are kind of referenced as the top choices to what we want to build for our aging population and so forth. Disabled people like myself and others who are, I would say, lucky, because we are lucky in terms of our social class of accessing certain levels of support. I have a personal health budget. I employ 5 members of staff to assist me and go about my daily routine and so forth. But the idea of a personal health budget or a personal budget of having government money given to the individual to spend on the support that they want to receive and so forth, it's so hard trying to publicize that as an idea for people to take hold of, because we go back and kind of retreat to our historical ways of providing care and support. I think there's a wider issue as well as to what does care and support mean for disabled people, because it means something very different from those who have acquired their impairment or have experienced a disability and have gone through that kind of political journey, as opposed to those who have experienced it later in life or have experienced it through an aging population and so forth. Because again, for me, I don't receive care. I receive assistance to live my life the way that I want to live it. And of course, I do experience marginalization on a daily basis as a disabled person. But the notion of having support is linked to the ideal of interdependency. I rely on another person to assist me, but I still want to retain choice and control over my life. And you see so often the messages of people, going back to that topic of individualism, of kind of personal responsibility and ableism. You see how so many people don't want that. They want to reject that. They don't want assistance from others. They don't see the idea of being supported in various different ways as a political issue. They see it as one which undermines their sense of identity. And I think it's a fascinating area that needs further exploration. So I suppose if the dominant dialogue associated with the issue that you raised is focusing so much on the issues of traditional support, of the traditional ideas of health and care and so forth, then I don't think it's going to be very helpful for disabled people and the activists to kind of look at disability from a human rights perspective or look at it from a social justice issue. Because the ideas around what care, what support means, what health intervention means, what interdependency means, and so forth, assistance, they mean something very different to disabled people who have gone through that political journey. And it's about trying to ensure that that's part of the discussion and part of the dialogue by the parliamentarians and the policymakers and the activists in trying to realize what a system of support looks like for our population, irrespective of whether we're talking about people beyond the age of 60 or below the age of 18 and so forth. And I think a perfect example of this is in the debate around assisted suicide as well. And we see it so often around how, as somebody who's a member of Not Dead Yet and campaigns for no legalization of assisted suicide legislation, I don't want that in the UK. I don't want that in the entire world, because I think it's deeply dangerous for disabled people. But if you look at the arguments put forward by those who want it, you can see how it links into those ideas of health, being independent, linking into that idea of rejecting assistance, of how having assistance to help you with how your body functions undermines your sense of identity or undermines that sense of ableism and so forth. And for many disabled people, our experience of assistance is completely different from that. Our experience of interacting with health professionals is not about cure and rehabilitation. I don't go to my doctor, once every month or once every couple of months and talk about how I want to be cured of how my body functions or how I want my body to change in any way. I want to rely on health services to exist in society, but my marginalization can't be explained through my health or through the way that my body functions. I think that's where we must protect that discussion if we're going to talk about the future of support for people in society.
In my understanding of political history, those who wield power do not cave to the agenda, to the talking points of civil rights or human rights groups. They just don't. They have, not just because those arguments are right and just, and suddenly there's a sort of Damascene conversion and they say, yes, you're absolutely right, we're going to go in the direction that you suggest. That, in my lifetime, that's never happened. South Africa, it doesn't happen, and it didn't happen in black civil rights in the United States. What does happen is this constellation of other forces, other powerful instincts that encourage those who have power to give way a little bit. And so what I was trying to get at with the health debate and the aging population, this demographic winter, is, do you foresee the arrival from different angles, some kind of 5D chess situation that creates an opening for the argument of disability rights to be that much more palatable to those who have power?
I suppose the issue around disability rights is only realised insofar that it meets economic and kind of political objectives of those with power at the moment. What you're seeing across the world is the people and the citizens of states which hold the majority of power. Because again, I like the quote from, I think it's David Hume, who says, people in power are just people with opinions, and actually the real power comes from those from the majority on the ground. But what I think is quite interesting is that people are dissatisfied with their life chances. They're concerned about the different systems within the community, education, employment, and so forth. But I suppose that where we're going to get to is that we will have this dissatisfaction will continue because we have got a very unstable and an unequal economic system and kind of political agendas which are breeding inequality and so forth. But what I think is going to be key to this is how we ensure that the debate around the rights of disabled people is perceived by those who have no connection to disability or think they have no connection to disability. Because again, if we think about health system, if I have disabled people activists and I have myself who talk about the importance of health, which for me is not about curing me of my inverted commas impairment or my health condition, but it's about providing me with the right level of support to exist in society. I've got to be able to articulate that to people who may want to see cure and the ending of people with my condition. I have to go to an education system and I have to say we want an inclusive education system for all people to be together in an education system. But we need to reframe what it means to be educated and what is the purpose of education. But I have to sell that idea and I have to promote that idea to people who think that disability is detached from them completely. So I think the time is now, certainly because we have such dissatisfaction and such unrest bubbling away across the entire globe around the way that our society is functioning. But as a marginalized group and of activists who are looking at particular issues around what it means to be a disabled person in society and what that label of disability means, we have to be able to provide and articulate it in a way that it grasps the attention and the significance for other people as well. Because take inclusive education, you so often hear the phrase of, oh, well, yeah, I support disabled people being educated with non-disabled people, but just not in my child's classroom. And actually, we need to go beyond that and say, actually, we're talking about health, we're talking about employment, we're talking about care, we're talking about the education system, and so forth. Whatever we're talking about, the impact of disability needs to be explored within that. We need to think about how it currently manifests, what it currently produces in terms of how people think about disability. And then we need to articulate a different idea, a different vision for that. So the time is now, but we can't take it for granted or be overly optimistic that disabled people and the political groups associated with looking at the construct of disability are going to be part of those debates, because they're not. They won't be part of those debates unless there are opportunities for disabled people to be supported, to have their voices heard in the various different ways that we communicate and articulate our ideas and messages. That won't happen unless we have enough allies who are willing to support us in order to have our voices echoed across the globe.
Miro, what gives you hope as a human rights defender?
For me, it's the continuous question of progression. I hear the ideas of the arc of history bending towards inclusion and so forth, and I always kind of die a little bit inside when I hear that. But I think for me, it's a case of we need to constantly question, what does it mean to say that we've progressed? How do we understand that? How do we explain and justify that just because we have this situation now and it's different to a time of 50, 10, 30, 100 years ago, it's better and therefore we should be happier with it, because we shouldn't. So as somebody who kind of supports human rights and I can only do as much as I can, and I will be supported and I will be criticized, and that's absolutely fine. But for me, it's constantly thinking that I need to continuously challenge this idea of progression, because for me it breeds complacency. It breeds being overly optimistic, and I want to realize that we need to sober up sometimes, and we need to recognize that there is injustice going on every day, and that as long as we are talking about it, and as long as there are actions being born from activists and campaigners, and that we are making alliances with other groups who are interested in common goals, and that we are having our voices heard, then there will be change. And change will obviously come at various different stages, and the changes will be positive and they will be negative. But the hope is, for me, is that if we build this idea of solidarity, we build this idea of collectivism, and try to dismantle the notion of individualism, then I do think that we will build towards a better society. It won't be inclusive, because if it wants to be inclusive, then there needs to be radical change. And that'll take us off in a completely different conversation that needs more time. But I think we need to aspire towards an inclusive society. But for me, and what I get hope from, is when I see people talking about what do these terms mean. Because, like we've been doing now for the last 45 minutes, like I do when I'm teaching classes, like I do when I'm talking to young people, young SAIL people who are exploring issues around support and choice and control of the life and so forth. It's not taken for granted these terms such as progression, such as social justice, such as inclusion, because we constantly need to be reflecting on what these terms mean and not use them in such lazy ways and kind of print them on the beginning of action plans. We want to create an inclusive society. We never even had the conversation about what inclusion means yet. And I think that gives me hope, because we are talking about it. But I suppose the drive for what I do comes from the fear of what will become if we don't carry on in the work that we're doing, in the direction that we're trying to take. Because as we've seen so evidently in the UK and across Europe as well and across the world, is that you can have the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, you can ratify it, and you can have your state dismiss it. And it's painful to realize that, but I think there is work that's being done by many activists on the ground who together, and that commonality and that solidarity will lead to further discussions, and hopefully those discussions will lead to a better society.
Miro Griffiths, thank you.